The cave walls were damp, and the air was thick with the smell of wet fur and blood. Aaron tightened his grip on his sword, heart pounding in nervousness. Somewhere ahead, low growls echoed through the tunnels. "Stay sharp," Garrick said, stepping ahead. His older brother moved with ease, eyes scanning the passage for movement. Wolves don't fight alone. If you see one, expect more. His sister, Lyra, walked beside Aaron. "Don't let him scare you. They're just overgrown dogs." A snarl cut through the cave. From the shadows, a pair of glowing yellow eyes locked onto them. Then another. And another. 3 wolves crept forward, their bodies tense, claws scraping against the stone floor. One of them, a larger scarred beast, snapped its jaws, warning them to back off. "Go for the weakest one first," Lyra whispered. "Fast and clean." The wolves didn't wait. One of them lunged straight for Aaron. His body moved on instinct. He ducked, barely avoiding the snapping jaws, and swung his sword. The wolf twisted midair, his strike only grazing its side. The beast landed and spun around, fangs bared. "Too slow," Lyra called out. Before Aaron could react, the second wolf rushed in from the side. Garrick easily intercepted it, his axe flashing in the dim light. The blade sank into the wolf's skull, killing it instantly. Aaron gritted his teeth. No time to think. He charged forward, feinting to the left before slicing to the right. The wolf flinched, just enough for his blade to land into its neck. A light yelp, then silence. The last wolf bolted, escaping into the tunnels. Aaron stood there panting, his hands trembling slightly. His first real fight. His first kill. "Not bad," Garrick said, pulling his axe free from the corpse. "Could have been cleaner, but you didn't die. That's what matters." Lyra nudged Aaron with her elbow. "You scared?" He shook his head. "No, just, it felt different than I thought it would." "Yeah," Garrick said, stepping over the bodies. "It always does." The 3 of them moved deeper into the cave. The wolf den wasn't a straight path. Tunnels branched in different directions, some leading to dead ends, others looping back around. It was like a maze. Lyra pointed to 2 paths ahead. Left or right? Aaron glanced at both paths. The left path was narrow. Swinging his sword would be difficult. The right one was much more accessible, enough for all 3 of them to fight side by side. His pulse was still racing, but the thrill of battle was already settling in. There were more wolves ahead, and somewhere, deep inside this dungeon, the Wolf King was waiting. He took a breath and made his choice. "Let's go right." The right. Tunnel opened into a wider chamber, the air colder than before. 2 wolves stood in the center, eyes locked onto the intruders. Their ears twitched, low growls vibrating through their throats. "They knew we were coming," Garrick muttered. "Pick your target!" Lyra cracked her knuckles. "I got the ugly one." "They're both ugly," Aaron said. "Fine. I got the uglier one." Before the wolves could react, Lyra raised her hand, her fingers curling as frost gathered in her palm. Crystallum nivis. A sharp ice shard formed in the air and shot forward, piercing the wolf's side. It yelped but didn't go down. Snarling, it charged at her, fangs bared. Lyra sighed, shaking her head. "Tough guy, huh?" She raised her hand again. This time, ice crackled around her fingertips, forming into something much deadlier. Frostum. "Lancia!" A spear of ice shot forward at blinding speed. The wolf barely had time to yelp before the spear impaled its chest, lifting it off the ground and pinning it to the cave wall. It twitched once, and then went still. Lyra flipped her hair back, grinning. "And that, gentlemen, is how you kill with style. Your sister, saving the day once again." Garrick rolled his eyes. "Show off." Aaron barely heard them. The second. Wolf was already lunging at him, but this time he didn't panic. The beast leaped forward and Aaron stepped to the side. Its claws scraped the stone where he had been standing. Before it could recover, Aaron slashed his sword across its back, cutting deep. The wolf spun, snapping at him, but he was faster. He ducked under its bite, shifting his grip on the sword, and drove the blade into its throat. The wolf let out a weak whimper, then collapsed. Aaron exhaled. That felt easier. Lyra clapped her hands slowly. "Well, well, little brother. Look at you. Didn't even trip this time." "I never tripped," Aaron muttered. Lyra smirked. "Next? Thing you know you'll be stealing my spotlight." "Doubt it." "Good. I need someone to carry my bags when I become famous." Garrick snorted. "We're in a prison, Lyra. No one's becoming famous." She shrugged. Then I'll settle for being feared. Aaron shook his head, but a small smile tugged at his lips. His sister was ridiculous, but he couldn't deny it. She was strong. Same for his older brother, Garrick. Just a quick reminder before we get started, only 4% of my viewers have subscribed to the channel so far. If you enjoy the content, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to hit that subscribe button and support the channel. Thank you so much. Now continue amazing story, and if he kept going, soon he would be too. Garrick glanced down the tunnel ahead. No time to rest. We've still got more wolves to hunt. Lyra stretched. Then what are we waiting for? Wolves fell one after another. With every fight, Aaron felt like he attacked cleaner and wasted less energy. His footwork sharpened, his grip on the sword more natural. They carved through the dungeon room by room. Blood stained the stone floors, the scent of it thick in the air. Then, finally, the tunnel widened into an empty chamber. Garrick exhaled, rolling his shoulders. We're here. A rest point. Aaron had read about these natural safe zones inside dungeons where monsters couldn't step foot. No one really knew why, but every dungeon had them. A place to breathe before facing whatever is ahead. Lyra flopped onto a rock, stretching. Finally! My legs were starting to hurt. You barely did anything, Garrick muttered, sitting down. She gasped, clutching her chest. How dare you? Did you not witness my masterful magic? I saw you impale a wolf and then spend the rest of the time watching Aaron fight. Lyra shrugged. I call that letting him grow. Aaron shook his head, smirking as he sat down. His body ached, but it wasn't exhaustion, more like a dull soreness. And he liked that. Garrick leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. All right, now that you've got some experience, let's talk. Aaron looked at him in confusion. About what? Dungeons. Levels. How everything works. I already know some of it. Not enough. Garrick's expression was serious. You just turned 16. That means you need to start thinking like a real fighter. Aaron stayed quiet. Garrick continued. This is a level 1 dungeon. That means all the monsters are level 1, and the strongest. Thing in here, the boss, is at most level 2. Simple, right? Aaron nodded. Every dungeon has a level cap. The higher the floor, the stronger the dungeons. We're on floor 1, the lowest. That means the strongest people here are tier 1, levels 1 through 10. No one on this floor can go past that. Aaron frowned. So if someone wanted to get stronger, they'd have to move up? Exactly. Garrick leaned back. Every floor gets harder. Stronger monsters, stronger people. If you're weak, you don't survive. Lyra twirled a finger in the air. And lucky us, we're at the very bottom of the food chain. Aaron wasn't surprised. He had grown up knowing that the dungeon realm was a prison, a world built for those who lost the war eons ago. But hearing it again from Garrick made it feel more depressing. Garrick looked at him. You want to level up? Aaron sat up. Yeah. Then listen. Garrick held up a finger. You kill monsters, you gain experience. The stronger the monster, the better the experience. He held up a second finger. But to actually level up, you need something else. Energy shards, Aaron said. Garrick nodded. Right. Dungeon bosses drop them. When you absorb an energy shard, it pushes you closer to your next level. Just bosses? Aaron asked. Yeah, normal monsters don't drop them unless you're on the higher floors. Aaron frowned, thinking. So, technically, someone could just farm weak dungeons over and over to get strong? Garrick shook his head. Doesn't work like that. The more you level up, the more energy shards you need. You have to fight stronger things to progress. Staying in weak dungeons will only take you so far. Aaron thought about that. It made sense. If leveling was easy, everyone would be strong. Lyra yawned, stretching again. Basically, baby brother, kill things, take their loot, and don't die. She patted his shoulder. Simple, right? Aaron smirked. Simple. Garrick stood. Good, because the boss is ahead. The air in the room felt heavier. Aaron looked toward the tunnel leading deeper in. The Wolf King was waiting. He clenched his fist. He was ready. Lyra cracked her knuckles, grinning. Let's see if you can keep up. The moment they stepped into the chamber, Aaron felt it. A presence stronger than the other wolves they had fought. At the far end of the room, standing on a raised platform. Of stone was the boss, a massive creature with its fur a shade darker than the rest. Its yellow eyes gleamed with intelligence. 4 other wolves stood beside it, slightly larger than the ones they had fought before. Their low growls echoed through the chamber. Garrick exhaled, adjusting his grip on his sword. "This is a level 2, boss. Lyra and I are both level 4. We can handle it." He glanced at Aaron. "You're not ready for that fight yet." Aaron didn't argue. He wasn't reckless. The boss was a step above what he could handle. But that didn't mean he wouldn't fight at all. His eyes locked onto the elite wolves. Garrick nodded, understanding. "All right, you take one of the elites." Lyra grinned. "And I'll deal with the rest." The wolves didn't wait. They charged. Aaron stepped forward, meeting the wolf's attack head on. Its claws lashed out, but he was faster this time, ducking under the strike and countering with a slash of his own. His blade cut into its side, drawing blood, but the beast barely flinched. It twisted, snapping its jaws at him. Aaron barely pulled back in time. Meanwhile, Lyra extended both hands. Energy crackled around her fingertips. Bruma Strigus. A wave of frost erupted from her, coating the floor in ice and slowing the movement of all 5 wolves. Their fur was quickly covered in frost, their growls turning into pained whimpers as the cold seeped into their bodies. Lyra smirked. "And now?" She flicked her hands forward. "Frostum Lancia, Frostum Lancia, Frostum Lancia." 3 ice spears materialized in the air and shot toward the frozen wolves, each one striking with precision. The shards pierced through their skulls, killing them instantly. Lyra sighed, stretching. Too easy. Aaron wasn't paying attention. His fight was still going. The wolf lunged again, its movement slightly sluggish from the previous ice spell, but still dangerous. Aaron sidestepped, bringing his sword up, and this time his blade sliced through the wolf's neck. It collapsed. He barely even felt tired. Lyra clapped. "Look at you, moving like a real warrior." Garrick, on the other hand, was still fighting the Wolf King, but he wasn't aiming to kill. Instead, Garrick was dragging it out. His movements were calm, precise. Each time the Wolf King lunged, he dodged by a hair's width, countering with small but effective strikes. Aaron frowned, watching. "Why is he taking so long?" Lyra leaned closer. "He's showing you how to conserve strength. Watch carefully. Every move he makes is just enough. No wasted swings, no unnecessary dodges. That's how you fight when stamina actually matters." Aaron's eyes narrowed as he focused on the battle. Garrick wasn't overpowering the boss. He was outlasting it. The Wolf King grew slower. Its movements became sluggish, each attack weaker than the last. Garrick took his time, letting it wear itself down. Then, finally, when the beast hesitated for just a second too long, Garrick ended its life. A clean strike to the throat. The Wolf King collapsed with a final gurgling howl. Silence filled the chamber. A faint blue glow appeared over the corpse. An energy shard. Garrick exhaled, stepping back. "That's how you fight smart." Aaron nodded slowly. He understood that strength mattered, but efficiency was just as important. Lyra nudged him. "You ready to get stronger?" Aaron stared at the shard pulsing with energy. This was it. His first step forward, Aaron reached out and grabbed it. He held the energy shard between his fingers. It looked like any other stone, rough and solid, but something about it felt different. It pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. He turned to Garrick. "So, what do I do with this?" Garrick wiped his blade clean before answering. "It's simple. Just crush it. The energy inside will flow into you, strengthening your body." Aaron glanced down at the shard again. It didn't look fragile, but he clenched his fist around it and squeezed. The shard cracked and then shattered. A sudden warmth spread through his body, like a small flame igniting inside him. His muscles tightened slightly, his breathing steadied, and for a brief moment, he felt sharper, faster. It wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't some massive transformation. But it was there. Lyra tilted her head, watching. "Well, feel any different?" Aaron opened and closed his hand. "Yeah. Stronger, but not by much." Garrick nodded. "That's expected. These are just low-tier energy shards. Bosses from level 1 to level 3 drop them. The higher the level, the stronger the shard." Lyra crossed her arms, smirking. "And before you get excited, you'll need about 10 of those to hit level 2. So don't start thinking you're unstoppable yet." Aaron exhaled, rolling his shoulders. He had figured it wouldn't be instant. Still, This was his first real step toward getting stronger. "Then we'll just keep going," he said. Lyra grinned. "Now that's the spirit." Garrick gestured toward a small alcove in the chamber. "Come on, let's grab the loot." Aaron followed, his heartbeat picking up. Every dungeon had a treasure chest waiting at the end, the reward for clearing it. Tucked against the stone wall was a large wooden chest. A simple metal lock kept it shut, but as Garrick pushed the lid open, the lock snapped off effortlessly. Inside, the loot gleamed under the light. Aaron reached inside and pulled out a sword. It was slightly longer than his current one. The blade, polished silver with deep engravings of wolves running along its fuller. The hilt was wrapped in dark leather. The name was carved near the base of the blade. Fang Piercer. Lyra whistled. "Now that's a nice upgrade. Way better than that rusty twig you've been using." Aaron grinned, swapping out his beginner's sword for Fang Piercer. He gave it a few test swings. The balance was smoother and the weight was just right. Then, at the bottom of the chest, he spotted two familiar glowing stones. Energy shards. Aaron looked at his brother and sister. "Come on," Lyra said. "Take it. It's useless for us right now." Garrick nodded in agreement. He quickly grabbed one and crushed it in his hand. The energy seeped into his body, giving him the same strengthening sensation as before. He crushed the second one, and again he felt stronger. Not by much, but noticeable. "Not bad," Garrick said. 3 shards in one run. Keep this up, and you'll hit level 2 before long." Aaron nodded, tightening his grip on Fang Piercer. With better gear and more energy absorbed, he was already looking forward to the next dungeon. Lyra stretched. "We're done here. Let's head back." The journey back through the dungeon was uneventful. The wolves were gone, the eerie silence stretching across the dimly lit corridors. Before long, they reached the entrance, a circular platform engraved with strange symbols. The teleportation platform. Garrick stepped onto it first. In an instant, his body shimmered and vanished. Aaron followed, and the world blurred for a moment before he found himself standing at the entrance of Wolf Den. The cave's gaping mouth loomed before them. It was in complete darkness. No matter how hard Aaron squinted, he couldn't see a thing inside, but he knew what would happen. Step into the darkness, and you'd be teleported back into the dungeon. Aaron turned to his brother. "So, when can we go again?" Garrick shook his head. "Not yet. Dungeons have a cooldown period." Aaron frowned. "How long?" 12 hours for level 1 dungeons, Garrick explained. Stronger dungeons take even longer. But there's no need to worry. There are plenty of level 1 dungeons to clear. Lyra groaned dramatically. "Ugh, let's not talk about dungeons right now. I need a bath, a meal, and a bed." In that order, she turned toward the nearby trees where their horses were waiting, lazily chewing on the grass. Aaron followed, mounting his own horse. Echelon City wasn't far, but after hours of dungeon crawling, the ride home felt like a well-earned break. With the sun dipping below the horizon, they rode off. They were at the edge of the wilderness, also called the High Forest. This vast area stretches for hundreds of miles and contains dungeons of nearly every level, even level 10 dungeons deep in the center. However, the outer parts of the forest have been mostly tamed. Outposts are scattered every few miles, and some guilds have even built their own bases nearby. The road continued for a while ahead, the sky slowly dimming from the setting sun. But as Aaron rode forward, the massive silhouette of Echelon City came into view. It was a massive city, its towering stone walls reaching to the sky. The city was one of the many beacons of human civilization, built in the middle of nowhere, a place where countless people came for refuge, power, and opportunity. As they approached the entrance, Aaron saw the long lines of travelers, merchants, and adventurers waiting to get inside. The city gates were always packed, but the Storm family didn't need to wait. They followed a separate path, one reserved for known citizens, bypassing the crowds. The guards at the gate recognized them immediately and let them through without trouble. The moment they entered, Echelon City's streets unfolded before them. Narrow alleys twisted between stone buildings, filled with the endless chatter of vendors calling out their wares. Market stalls lined the roads, selling everything from weapons and armor to food and trinkets. Adventurers moved in groups, some that just came from dungeons, others already preparing for their next run. "Home sweet home," Lyra said with a satisfied sigh. They navigated the busy streets with ease, eventually reaching into the inner section. of the city, where more notable people live. They soon reached a large courtyard estate tucked within the city. 2 guards stood at the entrance, each gripping their weapons with practiced ease. Both guards were level 5 warriors who had served the Storm family for decades, long enough to see Aaron, Garrick, and Lyra take their first steps. The moment the trio came into view, the 2 men broke into wide, familiar smiles. "Look what the forest spit back out," the first guard chuckled, his voice rough but warm. "Was starting to think you 3 got lost for good." Aaron grinned. "You'd miss us too. Much, Uncle Davith." The second guard, Harlan, reached out and ruffled Garrick's hair, a habit from when the boy was barely waist-high. "Quiet as a graveyard here. Boring, without you lot causing trouble." Garrick swatted his hand away, but there was no real annoyance in it. "Give it a day, we'll find some," Harlan snorted. "That's what I'm afraid of." Davith shook his head, but his eyes were fond. "Just don't drag us into it this time." With that, the siblings dismounted their horses and stepped through the gates, finally back home. Now start here new story. God farts? Secondary translation specialist Colv cringed under Fleet Admiral Tolwyn's gaze. He'd checked and rechecked multiple times, but the translation was what it was. Colv drew himself up and squared his whiskers. "That is so exalted, Admiral," he said, somehow finding his voice despite the terror of the moment. The Admiral turned back to the hollow block in the center of the CIC. His own whiskers bristled as he watched the constellation of Terran ships coming for them. Colv didn't feel much worry as he looked at that constellation. The humans had tried time and again to defeat the ever-victorious fleet, and he took comfort in knowing that a fleet didn't get a name like ever-victorious by having ships blasted out from under them. The idea of the fleet admirals was far more terrifying than whatever the primitives were throwing at them to save their system from resource harvesting. "No matter, they're going to get the same response they always do," the fleet admiral said. It took Colv a moment to realize the fleet admiral was looking down at him. The admiral's tail quivered with barely contained joy, a stark counterpoint to the way Colv's own tail quivered with barely contained anxiety. The admiral wanted a response. His mouth worked. "I suppose so, exalted admiral," Colv finally managed to hiss out. "Exactly so," the admiral said, his tail escaping his rigid control for a moment and twitching in anticipation of the battle to come. "Electronic warfare. Are you prepared?" "We are, exalted admiral," a senior electronic warfare technician said from the other end of the CIC. "This is your first time in the CIC for one of these, isn't it?" the fleet admiral asked. Again, it took a moment for Colv to realize the fleet admiral was talking to him. "That is so, exalted admiral," he said. "I imagine senior translation specialist Vesot hit the nip a little too hard last night?" the admiral asked, again his tail quivering in barely contained amusement. "I would not know, exalted admiral," Colv said, trying to keep his own tail from betraying him. He damn well knew why he was here in the CIC at such a critical moment, and it had everything to do with Vesot not being able to keep away from the strange herb they'd discovered on the Terran homeworld before the last invasion was pushed off-world by the determined hairless apes who presumed to act like they still owned the place. "The package is ready to be delivered," the senior electronic warfare technician said after a moment. "Do the honors, senior technician," the admiral said. "Show them what it means to send their primitive adding machines against the ever-victorious fleet." "It shall be so, exalted admiral," the technician said. Her claws danced across her control board, but there was no obvious change all around them. Though Colv had heard all about this, the Terrans tended towards primitive in everything from the way they organized their society by warring tribes, albeit tribes that sometimes spanned continents, to their information technology. It was standard operating procedure. The ever-victorious fleet had discovered thousands of rotations ago that it was often easier to attack the computers running primitive ships and then go in and mop up an enemy who couldn't fire back at their leisure. Sporting? Not exactly, but no one was ever victorious if they only ever went into a fair fight. This was the first time Colv had seen it happen personally. Sure, he'd seen the recordings of the first Terran fleet that had been easily disabled and destroyed. Sure, he'd watched the destruction of the last Terran missile swarm they hurled out to the gas giant they orbited to begin resource harvesting, but that hadn't been the same. There wasn't the same delicious tension and anticipation as in the CIC, God farts, the fleet admiral said, his tail twitching in amusement. "I know the Terrans have an odd sense of humor, but why call those missiles God farts? Why try to threaten us with them like they're any different from the last missile swarm?" Colv straightened his whiskers. This was the third time the admiral had addressed him, and he was almost used to it by now. His claws danced across his own screen as he brought up the information that led him to this very odd translation. "It is an odd turn of phrase. Exalted Admiral," Kolv said. "It comes from one of their island nations. The one that was a major belligerent in the last global conflict our probes monitored." "Ah, the island with the giant radioactive lizard?" the fleet admiral asked. "Our specialists never were able to figure out where that thing was hiding during the last invasion, for all that it never emerged to challenge us." "The very same, Exalted Admiral," Kolv said. A ping on his screen drew Kolv's attention. A message from Vesot. His claw hovered to answer it, hesitating because he really didn't want to talk to Vesot at that moment. But blessedly, his CIC duties pulled him away from dealing with his hungover superior, though he wasn't sure it was a blessing once he gave more than one ear to the conversation. "Why haven't they stopped?" the fleet admiral asked, stepping up to the holographic display. He swiped a claw, and the display magnified in on one of the god farts. It was a simple thing. No more than a nuclear warhead in front, a fusion reactor on the back, and not much else. "I'm sending the package again, Exalted Admiral," the technician said. "It's possible they've tried to harden their systems against outside interference." "They can try," the admiral said, though his tail didn't quiver with amusement anymore. No, it stood straight up and stock still. "There's something about these craft that seems different from the last nuclear missile swarm they sent at us. Running a new deep scan on them, Exalted Admiral," a technician said from somewhere, though Kolv didn't catch who said it. No. His attention was on the close-up of that primitive craft and the wider display behind it that showed thousands of them heading for the ever-victorious fleet. They were primitive, but somehow seeing the thing up close gave it a threatening and malevolent feel. Kolv imagined that was the sort of feeling he might get if someone tried to kill him with a sharp rock. Primitive, yes, but more than capable of landing a death blow in the hands of a skilled primitive. A ripple ran down his fur as he tried to concentrate on his duties. "The package has been delivered, Exalted Admiral." "Again," the technician said. "Very good," the admiral said, his tail still stock still. Another ping pulled Kolv attention away from the holoblock and back to his own station. It was a request for a video chat this time. Kolv let out a low growl. It would seem that Vesot had finally stumbled out of his addled stupor to do some work, and that important work couldn't wait until after they were under attack. Another ripple ran down his fur. Why would he think they were under threat? The Ever. Victoria's fleet didn't need to worry about nuclear weapons that were like something out of their own species' dark ages. Kolv didn't want to take the call, but Vesot was his superior. He swiped a claw, and the audio went to his ear implants. Even as Vesot's haggard face appeared on the screen in front of him, there was something about that look that gave Kolv pause.